In the quiet hours of night, when the mind drifts between thought and dream, let us step back into a time when gods and goddesses walked among mortals, shaping the fates of cities and heroes alike. At the center of this mythic world stands Athena, a goddess whose very presence is wrapped in paradox. She is called the goddess of wisdom, yet also the goddess of war. She embodies reason, but her temper could ignite calamity. To speak of Athena is to step into the heart of Greek mythology, a place where the divine is never simple, and where even the brightest light carries shadows. Athena was not just another Olympian. For the people of ancient Greece, she represented something rare, a balance of intellect and power. She was worshipped as the protector of Athens, the namesake of that great city, and the guardian of knowledge, skill, and strategy. Yet her stories remind us again and again that wisdom does not always walk hand in hand with kindness. The myths whisper of her favor, her guidance, but also her jealousies and punishments. And so, to understand Athena is to understand a goddess who is as inspiring as she is unsettling. When we look upon the marble statues and weathered temples dedicated to her, it is easy to imagine Athena as a calm, steady force, an eternal figure with her spear in hand and the owl of wisdom at her side. But beneath that calm exterior was a power that could be both protective and destructive. Her wrath was not the wild, fiery rage of Mars, nor the stormy vengeance of Zeus. It was quieter, colder, more deliberate. To cross Athena was to invite a punishment that lingered forever, one that reshaped lives and stories for eternity. It is this side of Athena, the side that transforms, curses, and reshapes destinies, that we will journey through together tonight. But before diving into those tales of wrath and punishment, we must linger for a while on the world that created her. The ancient Greeks did not invent their gods as perfect beings. Instead, they reflected human struggles, fears, and triumphs. Their gods were flawed, and that was precisely why they mattered. To the people who told these stories by firelight, Athena's contradictions mirrored their own. She was reason and violence, justice and jealousy, brilliance and cruelty, all woven into one figure. In her, the Greeks saw both what they longed for and what they feared. There is a reason why Athena remains one of the most memorable figures from mythology. Unlike many deities who played distant roles, Athena was woven into the very fabric of Greek life. Farmers, artisans, soldiers, and rulers alike turned to her for guidance. In her temple on the Acropolis, worshippers would lay down offerings, hoping for her favor. Yet every prayer carried an unspoken understanding. Athena's blessing was not guaranteed, and her anger could be devastating. She was a goddess who demanded respect, not just in worship but in the stories that shaped the culture. And so tonight, as we walk slowly through these myths, we will see Athena not simply as a figure of admiration, but as a mirror of the ancient world's anxieties. The stories of her wrath, the transformations of mortals, the curses that lived on in legend, were never meant to be comfortable bedtime tales. They were warnings, gentle reminders of boundaries not to be crossed, and the consequences of challenging divine order. Yet as we listen to them now, centuries removed from the flickering torches of old, there is a strange peace in their rhythm. The stories unfold like waves, cresting in drama, then settling into stillness again, guiding us into reflection rather than fear. What makes Athena's mythology messed up, as we might say today, is not merely the harshness of her punishments, but the fact that they came from the goddess of wisdom. To think of wisdom as a force that can wound as easily as it protects is an unsettling truth, but one that echoes through every tale of her wrath. It reminds us that knowledge and power are never free of consequence. The Greeks understood this, and through their stories, they taught it. In this gentle retelling, we will not hurry. Each tale will open slowly, as though unrolling a tapestry. You will hear of Medusa, transformed from maiden to monster. Of Arachne, the weaver who became the first spider. Of heroes like Perseus and Odysseus, who relied on Athena's favor but never forgot the sharpness of her judgment. And of the city of Athens itself, forever bound to her name, shaped by her pride. Each story is a fragment of a larger picture, one that shows Athena's dual nature in both brilliance and wrath. As you settle into this journey, imagine yourself standing in an ancient temple at dusk. The air is still, the stone walls echo faintly with the prayers of long-forgotten worshippers, and at the center stands a statue of the goddess herself. She does not smile, but her eyes seem alive with thought, calculation, and quiet warning. This is Athena as the ancients knew her, brilliant, commanding, and deeply unpredictable. And it is this goddess we will come to know tonight, layer by layer, story by story. Now, with a calm breath, let us step further into her world, beginning not with her anger, but with her origin, an origin unlike any other, filled with strangeness, awe, and power. For in her very birth, Athena showed the world that she would never be like the rest of the gods.
Long before Athena became known as the wise guardian of Athens, long before her name was whispered in prayers and carved into marble, there was the matter of her strange and unforgettable birth. The myths of Greece are filled with unusual beginnings, but even among the countless tales of gods emerging from foam, stone, or chaos, the arrival of Athena is perhaps the most extraordinary. For she was not born in the way of mortals, nor even in the usual ways of gods. Her first breath came not from the cradle of a mother, but from the very mind of Zeus himself. The story begins with Metis, a titan known for her cleverness and foresight. Metis was not only wise but also cunning, and Zeus, ruler of the Olympians, admired her greatly. Some say he pursued her, desiring her as both companion and consort. Yet the fates whispered a warning: Metis was destined to bear children more powerful than their father. The first would be a daughter of unmatched wisdom. The second, a son, would one day overthrow Zeus himself. Such a prophecy was dangerous in the realm of the gods, where power was always contested and fear of being overthrown lingered in the minds of kings. Zeus, in his endless hunger to maintain control, made a choice both ruthless and strange. He swallowed Metis whole. One moment she stood beside him, clever and radiant, the next she was gone, consumed into the vastness of his being. Some storytellers imagined this as an act of violence, others as a desperate attempt to protect the balance of Olympus. Whatever the reason, Metis was no longer free, but her wisdom remained alive within Zeus. And it was there, deep inside his mind, that Athena began to take form. For a time, all seemed quiet. Zeus continued his reign, thundering across the skies, hurling bolts, demanding obedience. But then came the headaches. They began as dull, persistent aches, the kind that cloud thought. Soon they grew sharper, pulsing like fire within his skull. The pain was unlike anything even the king of gods could endure. Day by day, it grew unbearable, until at last, Zeus cried out for relief. The heavens themselves shook with his agony, and all of Olympus watched in awe and fear. In desperation, Zeus called upon Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, or in some versions, Prometheus, the bringer of fire. Whoever it was, the helper came forth with an axe, heavy and gleaming. With one swift blow, they split open the head of Zeus. From that divine wound, with a cry that echoed across the earth, Athena emerged fully grown, clad in armor, a shining spear in hand. She was radiant, fierce, and complete, a goddess who skipped the frailty of infancy and strode directly into the world as a warrior and a thinker. Imagine the scene, the sky glowing, Olympus trembling, as a goddess stepped forth from the mind of the king of gods. She was not merely born, she was revealed, a thought made flesh, the living embodiment of intellect and strategy. The gods around Zeus were stunned. Some whispered in fear, others in admiration. For never before had such a birth occurred, and never again would it be repeated. Athena was singular from the very beginning. The symbolism of her origin is striking. To emerge from the head of Zeus was to mark her as the goddess of wisdom itself. Unlike other deities tied to nature, the sea, or the underworld, Athena was a product of intellect, a spark of divine thought. She carried within her the cleverness of Metis, her mother swallowed but not erased, and the authority of Zeus, her father. This strange blending of parentage set her apart. She was both an inheritor of power and a reminder that control often comes at a price. For the mortals who told and retold this story, Athena's birth was not simply a spectacle, it was a lesson. Wisdom, they believed, did not come gently. It could arrive with pain, with struggle, with an intensity that split the head open. Knowledge was a gift, but also a burden, one that could leave even the mightiest reeling. In Zeus's suffering, they saw the cost of foresight and cleverness. In Athena's sudden arrival, they saw the sharp brilliance of reason, fully formed, unstoppable, and uncompromising. Yet even in her birth, the seeds of wrath can be traced. For while Athena was born radiant, her connection to Metis, the devoured mother, was never forgotten. Some ancient voices whispered that Athena carried within her not only wisdom, but the suppressed power of what might have been. The son who was never born, the prophecy unfulfilled, lingered like a shadow behind her. Perhaps it was this inheritance of suppression and loss that gave her stories their edge. She was wisdom, yes, but she was also the unspoken reminder of what Zeus had destroyed to preserve his rule. From this first moment, Athena's identity was tied to contradiction. She was born in battle armor, yet called upon as a goddess of peace. She was sprung from the mind, yet her punishments were as physical and lasting as any god's thunderbolt. She was a daughter without a mother, and yet forever connected to Metis, the silenced voice within Zeus. To the Greeks, these contradictions were not flaws, but truths. Life itself was contradictory, and their gods reflected that. As you let this story settle, imagine the hush that would have fallen over Olympus after her arrival. A goddess stood before them, spear gleaming, eyes bright with thought. Her voice would have been steady, confident, perhaps unsettling in its clarity. Even the other gods, immortal and powerful, would have known in that moment that Athena was unlike any other. She was born from wisdom and pain, destined to guide heroes, to protect cities, and, when crossed, to unleash a wrath as sharp as the blade she carried. And so, with her birth, the world was forever changed. A goddess who belonged to neither the chaos of titans nor the passion of mortals now walked among them. Her stories were only just beginning, but already she was marked by the strangeness of her origin, a child of mind, born in violence, radiant and terrible. As the night deepens, we leave this image in our minds, a goddess stepping forth from a divine wound, fierce yet calm, embodying wisdom wrapped in steel. From here, her journey unfolds into the heart of Olympus itself, where her role among gods and mortals will be shaped, tested, and revealed.
After her astonishing birth, Athena did not slip quietly into the background of Olympus. From her very first moment, fully armored and radiant with authority, she carved out a space among the immortals. Yet life on Olympus was never simple. The gods were a family, but a family filled with rivalries, jealousies, and fragile alliances. Within this glittering but tense household, Athena's place had to be defined, and the stories that survive show us how her wisdom and pride shaped her role among the gods. Unlike some deities who kept to their domains, Poseidon in the sea, Artemis in the forests, Demeter in the fields, Athena often moved between realms. She was a goddess of the mind, which meant she belonged wherever thought, craft, and strategy were required. To artisans, she gave the gift of weaving and skill with the hand. To warriors, she offered the art of strategy, teaching that battles were won not by brute force but by clever planning. To rulers and lawgivers, she stood as a symbol of reason and justice. This versatility made her one of the most respected deities in the Greek world. But such power did not come without tension. Poseidon, the god of the sea, clashed with her again and again. Their rivalry began early, when they contested for the right to claim a city as their own. The mortals of that land stood between them, waiting to see which god would provide the greater gift. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, and from the ground sprang a powerful horse, or in some versions, a saltwater spring, brimming but undrinkable. Athena, calm and deliberate, planted an olive tree, a gift of peace, sustenance, and enduring prosperity. The people judged her offering greater, and the city was named Athens in her honor. This victory was not simply a story of generosity. It showed Athena's ability to think beyond the immediate. Poseidon's gift was dazzling, full of energy, but Athena's was practical, wise, and lasting. Yet it also planted a seed of enmity between the two deities. From then on, their rivalry echoed in myths and in the lives of mortals. Sailors feared Athena's disfavor as much as they prayed for Poseidon's calm seas. Athenians, meanwhile, celebrated her triumph, building grand temples on the Acropolis, each stone a reminder of her victory. Within Olympus itself, Athena carried a reputation for impartial judgment. She was often called upon to settle disputes between gods and mortals alike. One of the most famous moments of judgment came in the tragic story of Orestes, when she presided over the first trial by jury in myth. By placing reason and fairness above endless cycles of revenge, she was seen as a bringer of law and order. Her voice was calm, measured, and yet final. To the Greeks, this was wisdom in action, clarity that cut through chaos. Yet Athena was not always the serene mediator. Her wisdom had edges, and her pride could be as sharp as her spear. While she despised the reckless violence of Ares, the god of war, she was not above guiding warriors herself. In fact, she thrived on it. Where Ares charged into battle with blind fury, Athena guided armies with calculation. She favored those who fought with discipline and intelligence, not with rage. This distinction made her worshipped not only among statesmen and artisans but also among generals and soldiers who longed for victory. And still, Athena was not beloved by all. To some gods, her closeness to Zeus was a reminder of her unique birth, a sign of favoritism. She was the daughter who sprang from his mind, carrying his authority in a way others did not. Some whispered envy, others offered wary respect. She never married, never bore children, and so her energy remained focused outward, shaping mortals and myths instead of family ties. This independence set her apart from many Olympian goddesses, whose stories were bound to love, motherhood, or rivalry with lovers. Athena's devotion was to ideas and to the shaping of human civilization itself. To mortals, this made her both a blessing and a danger. A city under her protection might flourish, growing wise, prosperous, and skilled. But to offend her was to invite punishment that could last for generations. For while she was called Pallas Athena, the virgin protector, her punishments were as enduring as her blessings. She did not lash out in fits of anger, she chose her moments carefully, and her wrath often took the form of transformations or curses that could not be undone. The Athenians, who claimed her as their guardian, built her shrines high above their city, believing her watchful gaze brought strength. The great statue of Athena Parthenos, once towering in the Parthenon, captured her dual nature, serene yet armored, wise yet ready for war. To stand before her likeness was to feel both comforted and unsettled, as though her eyes pierced into the heart of human ambition and pride. This is the essence of Athena's role in Olympus. She was not merely another god among many, she was a force that reminded mortals and immortals alike that wisdom is not soft. It can be sharp, decisive, and unforgiving. She stood as a bridge between thought and action, intellect and force, justice and vengeance. Her place in Olympus was to remind all that even among the gods, power must be guided by strategy and reason. As we move deeper into her myths, we begin to see how this balance tilted. The stories that survive are filled with moments when Athena's wisdom transformed into wrath, when her pride overshadowed her fairness, and when her guidance became a weapon. To understand her role among the gods is to prepare for the darker chapters of her legend, the ones where her brilliance turned cold and her punishments left scars on mortals and immortals alike. And so, having seen how she claimed her place on Olympus, respected, feared, and rivaled, we are ready to turn toward the heart of her nature. For what made Athena unforgettable was not only her wisdom, but the strange and unsettling shape her anger would take when that wisdom was tested. When we think of wrath in mythology, our minds often leap first to Zeus with his lightning bolts or Hera with her jealousy. We picture storms raging, cities burned, or mortals struck down in a flash of divine anger. Yet Athena's wrath was of an entirely different nature. It was quieter, colder, and far more enduring. To speak of Athena's wrath is to enter a space where anger and wisdom entwine, where punishment comes not as a sudden strike but as a careful, deliberate transformation that lasts forever. Athena was a goddess who prided herself on reason and clarity. She did not lash out wildly, nor did she waste her power on trivial slights. But when she felt her authority or her principles were challenged, her retribution was swift and permanent. Her anger left scars that could not be healed, curses that reshaped entire lives and even entire lineages. This made her wrath particularly unsettling, for it was not the kind of storm that passed. It was the kind of punishment that lingered like a shadow, generation after generation. For the Greeks who told her stories, Athena's wrath carried a warning: even wisdom has its breaking point. A goddess of intellect and fairness could still become dangerous when mortals forgot their place or when hubris tempted them to rival the divine. To the ancient audience, her anger was not simply divine cruelty. It was a reminder that boundaries must be respected, that pride must be tempered, and that even the gods of wisdom carried within them the potential for destruction. Unlike ours, who thrived in bloodlust, Athena's wrath was more precise. Where ours charged blindly onto battlefields, she chose her targets carefully. She did not scatter her rage broadly across the world, she focused it. A mortal might offend her in a single act of arrogance, and from that moment, their fate was sealed. The punishment was crafted to match the offense, symbolic in its cruelty. A maiden who wove too beautifully would find herself turned into a spider, forever weaving but never again rivaling a goddess. A woman who suffered in Athena's temple might become the monster that no mortal could look upon without turning to stone. Each story is layered with meaning, yet at its heart is a portrait of divine wrath wearing the mask of justice. This is what makes Athena's anger different from that of the other Olympians. It was never random. It was never mindless. Instead, it was almost intellectual, designed, shaped, and executed like a strategy in war. Her wrath reflected her identity as the goddess of planning and cunning. She did not simply destroy, she reformed. She reshaped lives and bodies, weaving her punishments into the very fabric of myth so they could not be undone. In that sense, her wrath was like her weaving, precise, patterned, and permanent. For those who prayed to her, this was both comforting and terrifying. A soldier might beg for Athena's guidance in battle, knowing her strategies could lead him to victory. Yet in the same breath, he might whisper apologies and offerings, hoping never to catch her eye in disfavor. A city under her protection could prosper for centuries, but one insult, one act of arrogance, could shift that fortune overnight. This duality is what made Athena so complex. She was not a goddess of chaos, but neither was she gentle. She was a goddess whose wisdom could tip into vengeance when provoked. Her wrath also tells us something about how the Greeks viewed their gods. In their eyes, divinity was not bound by human morality. The gods did not need to be fair in the way mortals hoped. Instead, their justice reflected a cosmic order, one in which mortals were always fragile, always vulnerable, and always reminded of their limits. To anger Athena was to step out of one's proper role, to forget the delicate line between mortal and divine. Her punishments reinforced that line with painful clarity. There is also a deep irony in her anger. Athena, who symbolized wisdom and balance, was often at her most memorable in moments of wrath. The goddess who should have been the voice of reason became a figure of fear. And yet, for the Greeks, this contradiction did not weaken her image. It strengthened it. For wisdom is not always gentle. It can be sharp, punishing, and unforgiving. Athena embodied this truth more than any other Olympian. To prepare for the stories that follow, it is worth pausing to see how her wrath shaped entire myths. In Medusa's tale, her anger turned a maiden into a monster, and from that punishment sprang a legend that haunted heroes for centuries. In the story of Arachne, a mortal's pride was answered with transformation, weaving divine retribution into the natural world itself. Even in her dealings with heroes she favored, Perseus, Odysseus, Heracles, there was always the hint that her favor could vanish, replaced by cold disapproval. She guided them, yes, but she also reminded them that her support was not unconditional. When compared with other gods, Athena's wrath stands apart. Zeus's punishments were thunderbolts, sudden and destructive. Hero's wrath often took the form of jealousy, chasing down lovers and their children. Poseidon unleashed storms on seas and drowned ships. But Athena's punishments were subtler, more personal. She did not simply kill or destroy. She transformed, reshaped, and left her mark in a way that could not be erased. This permanence gave her wrath an almost haunting quality, echoing through myth and memory long after the act itself. And so, as we turn toward the stories themselves, we carry this understanding: Athena's wrath is not fire and fury. It is something colder, sharper, and far more lasting. It is wisdom turned into a weapon, intellect sharpened into cruelty. It is the kind of anger that does not simply pass, it endures, shaping myths for all time. Let us move gently now into those stories, beginning with one of the most famous and tragic, the tale of Medusa, whose life was forever changed beneath the shadow of Athena's wrath. Long before her face became the stuff of nightmares, before her name was whispered with dread, Medusa was a maiden of rare beauty. In the oldest versions of the story, she was not a monster at all, but a mortal woman who walked the earth with grace and radiance. Her hair was said to flow in waves of shining beauty, so captivating that it drew the gaze of gods and men alike. Her eyes were bright, her features gentle, her presence alive with the vitality of youth. To see Medusa in those early days was not to recoil in fear, but to marvel, as one might marvel at a flower in bloom or the first light of dawn on a calm sea. She was one of 3 sisters, the Gorgons, though in her earliest depictions she alone was mortal. Her sisters, Stheno and Uriel, were fierce and deathless, creatures of myth even then. But Medusa, unlike them, was fragile and human, destined to age, to change, and to die. This difference made her special, both vulnerable and precious. Some say it was precisely this mortality, this fleeting beauty, that made her so striking to gods and mortals alike. She was not untouchable. She could be won, admired, perhaps even possessed. And in the world of myth, such vulnerability often spelled danger. Medusa's youth was spent in innocence. She served as a priestess in Athena's temple, a place of purity, devotion, and order. To walk in that sacred space was to live under strict vows, vows of chastity, of obedience, of reverence to the goddess who presided over wisdom and war. Within those marble walls, Medusa was meant to embody Athena's ideals, a living symbol of dedication. Her hair, her face, her very being became offerings in service of the goddess. Each prayer she whispered, each step she took in the temple, tied her fate more tightly to Athena. But beauty, in the world of Greek myth, was rarely a blessing. Time and again, mortals who shone too brightly drew the attention of the gods, and their lives were twisted by forces far beyond their control. To be beautiful was to be vulnerable, exposed to envy, desire, and wrath. For Medusa, this truth would unfold with devastating clarity. Different storytellers preserved different versions of what happened next. In some, Medusa was guilty of nothing but devotion, and her tragedy began when Poseidon, god of the sea, cast his gaze upon her. Overwhelmed by desire, he pursued her into Athena's temple, shattering the sanctity of that holy place. In other versions, Medusa herself willingly surrendered to Poseidon's advances, breaking her vows of chastity. Whichever version one listens to, the result is the same. The sacred temple of Athena was defiled, and Athena, in her cold and merciless wisdom, chose to punish Medusa rather than the god who had violated her sanctuary. For the modern ear, this decision feels unbearably cruel. To imagine a maiden, innocent or perhaps coerced, punished for something beyond her control is a reminder of how harsh and unforgiving the ancient myths could be. But in the logic of the old stories, Athena's wrath was not simply about blame. It was about the sanctity of her temple. To her, the violation was not a personal insult, it was an affront to her divine order, a stain upon her sacred space. And so, she turned her gaze not on Poseidon, who was her rival and too powerful to confront directly, but on Medusa, the fragile mortal who had been caught in the storm of divine desire. It is in this moment, before the transformation, that we must linger, for here lies the essence of Medusa's tragedy. She was a maiden who had drawn the attention of gods, who had lived faithfully under the shadow of Athena, and who in an instant became the target of divine wrath. Her life was not yet monstrous. She still walked in the form of a human woman, her beauty intact, her innocence uncertain, her fate suspended on the edge of a goddess's judgment. The calm before the storm, the moment before her punishment, is heavy with inevitability. Some storytellers portray her as terrified, praying desperately for mercy as Athena's anger grew. Others imagine her defiant, unbowed even as the goddess approached. Perhaps she knelt in the temple where she had once prayed, her hair falling like golden silk across her shoulders, unaware that those same locks would soon be her curse. Perhaps she lifted her eyes to the statue of Athena, searching for protection only to find none. However the scene is imagined, it is filled with sorrow. The punishment was coming, and nothing could prevent it. For the Greeks, Medusa's story was not told to comfort. It was told to remind listeners of the fragile line mortals walked when they stood too close to the gods. To serve the gods was to live in awe, but also in danger, for their favor was fickle and their wrath unrelenting. Medusa's tale is one of the clearest examples of this truth. She was chosen, perhaps even cherished, but that did not save her. In fact, it was her very closeness to the divine that sealed her fate. And yet, in the hush of the story, there is also a strange beauty. Medusa, in this moment before her fall, represents the fleeting brilliance of mortal life, the kind of brilliance that gods could admire but never truly possess. Her hair, her face, her devotion, these were mortal gifts, fragile and temporary. Perhaps this is why Athena's wrath was so sharp. Perhaps the goddess saw in Medusa a reflection of something she herself could never be, mortal, vulnerable, beautiful in a way that belonged only to those destined to die. As the night deepens and the story carries us forward, we leave Medusa standing in that temple, her life poised between beauty and terror. She has not yet become the monster that legends will remember, not yet turned her gaze into a weapon, not yet borne the serpents upon her head. She is still a maiden, still human, still balanced on the fragile edge of divinity and mortality. Soon, Athena's wrath will descend, and the world will remember her not for her beauty, but for her curse. But for now, we hold this image. Medusa before the curse, radiant, vulnerable, and tragically unprepared for the fate that awaited her.
The transformation of Medusa is one of the most haunting scenes in all of Greek mythology. It is a moment where beauty collapses into terror, where innocence dissolves into punishment, and where a goddess's wrath reshapes a mortal into something entirely other. To understand this change is to step into the cold, merciless heart of divine justice, as the Greeks once imagined it. Imagine, if you will, the quiet of the temple after the act of defilement. Marble columns rise into the air like frozen trees, their surfaces glowing faintly in the torchlight. The smell of salt and sea still lingers, for Poseidon, lord of the waters, has left his mark. The silence is heavy, almost unbearable, and in that silence stands Medusa. She trembles, perhaps. Or perhaps she stands still, paralyzed by the enormity of what has happened. She has broken, or been forced to break, the sacred vows of her service. And in Athena's eyes, that is an unforgivable stain. The goddess appears not as a comforter, but as an avenger. Her arrival is not described in detail in the oldest myths, but we may imagine it. A shimmer of light, a presence too vast for mortal senses, the sudden awareness that something greater than human anger fills the temple. Athena is not soft, not merciful. She does not come to soothe the wound, but to cleanse it. Her face, stern and unyielding, betrays no sympathy for the mortal before her. She is wisdom, yes, but wisdom can be sharp and cruel when it must enforce order. Medusa, still a maiden in human form, raises her eyes to the goddess. Perhaps she begs, words tumbling from her lips in desperation. Perhaps she pleads her innocence, swearing that she did not invite the sea god's advances. Perhaps she argues that she had no power to stop what had happened. But Athena does not listen. To the goddess, it does not matter whether Medusa was victim or participant. The fact remains, her temple has been violated. And someone must pay. The punishment comes swiftly, and it is terrible. Athena fixes her gaze upon Medusa, and in that gaze the transformation begins. The beauty that had once drawn admiration from all who saw her is the very thing the goddess seeks to destroy. Her hair, golden and flowing, begins to twist and writhe. The strands darken, harden, and take on a life of their own, until they are no longer hair at all but serpents. Scales glisten where once there had been soft curls. The snakes hiss, their tongues flickering, their bodies coiling endlessly, as though Medusa's own thoughts have turned into venomous creatures. Her skin changes too, pale flesh hardening, her features contorting. What once inspired desire now inspires dread. Her eyes, once bright and full of mortal warmth, become terrible instruments of divine punishment. To look upon them directly is to be undone, to be frozen in place, to lose the gift of life itself. A single glance, and a living being becomes stone, their final expression carved forever in stillness. Medusa screams, or perhaps she falls silent, her voice stolen along with her beauty. In some tellings, she flees the temple in horror, unable to comprehend what she has become. In others, she remains where she is, crumpled in despair, the snakes upon her head hissing in her stead. However the story is told, the transformation is complete. She is no longer a mortal woman. She is no longer even fully human. She is the monster that myths will remember, cursed forever by Athena's wrath. And yet, as we linger with this scene, we must pause. For the Greeks, Medusa's punishment was not just cruelty, it was symbolism. Her hair, once her most admired feature, became the very mark of her curse. Her beauty, once irresistible, was replaced by a face that no one could look upon without perishing. Everything that had made her beloved was inverted, twisted into its opposite. To live as Medusa was to live forever alone, forever feared, forever hunted. There is something profoundly tragic here. Medusa was not struck down in a single moment, like a mortal killed by a lightning bolt. No, her punishment was to live on, but as an exile, a pariah, a danger even to those who might have loved her. She could not touch, could not be touched. She could not meet another's gaze without condemning them to stone. The curse did not end her, it imprisoned her within herself. Athena, cold and resolute, withdrew once the transformation was complete. For the goddess, the matter was settled. The temple had been purified by the severity of her judgment. Balance had been restored. But for Medusa, life had only just become unbearable. Cast out from the world of mortals, she wandered until she found a home at the very edges of the earth, far from cities, far from temples, far from any place where she might bring harm. Her new home would be among shadows and silence, surrounded by rocks and seas where only the brave, or the foolish, would dare to follow. And so the maiden priestess became a monster, though in truth she was more victim than villain. The myths would remember her for her deadly gaze, her terrifying appearance, her monstrous nature. But behind all those retellings lingers this scene, the moment when beauty was broken, when divine wrath reshaped a mortal woman into a legend of horror. For those drifting into sleep with this story, there is a melancholy calm in Medusa's fate. She is both cursed and eternal, feared yet unforgettable. She stands as a symbol of how fragile beauty can be in a world where gods rule over mortals, and how swiftly admiration can become destruction. The temple grows silent again, its violation cleansed, but somewhere far beyond its marble walls, Medusa's serpents hiss, and her eyes glow with a power she never sought to possess. This is the heart of her tragedy, she did not choose her fate. It was given to her, placed upon her by the goddess she once served. From that moment on, her story would no longer belong to her, but to the myths, whispered in hushed tones by poets and storytellers for generations to come.
After the transformation, Medusa was no longer welcome among mortals. The temple that had once been her sanctuary was closed to her, its marble walls a reminder of her service and her punishment. She could not stay among people, for her gaze had become deadly. She could not walk freely through the marketplaces, nor return to the laughter of her sisters, nor seek comfort in the embrace of family. Every glance was a threat, every breath of her presence a danger. And so, Medusa withdrew. She turned her back on the world she had once known, retreating into the barren edges of the earth, far from the warmth of cities and the songs of human voices. The poets say she fled to a place beyond Oceanus, the great river that circled the world. There, on rocky shores and desolate plains, she found her dwelling. The land was harsh, beaten by winds and waves, with jagged cliffs rising like broken teeth above the sea. Few mortals dared to travel so far, and those who did rarely returned. For in that wild, empty place, Medusa's curse became legend. Travelers whispered of strange cries carried on the wind, of shapes glimpsed in shadow, of statues scattered among the rocks, men and beasts frozen mid-step, their final expressions captured in stone. In her solitude, Medusa lived a half-life. She breathed, she moved, she wandered, but she did not live as she once had. There was no companionship, no touch, no comfort. The serpents that adorned her head became her only company, hissing softly in restless coils, forever awake, forever alive. They writhed when she was angry, they quieted when she was calm, and in them, perhaps, she found a kind of companionship. Yet even they were a reminder of her curse, born not of her will but of Athena's wrath. Sometimes, she would wander the coastline, gazing across the waters she could not sail. Perhaps she thought of Poseidon, the god who had brought this fate upon her, and wondered if he remembered her at all. For him, it had been a passing moment, a desire satisfied, a conquest completed. For her, it had been the end of everything. Mortals in myth so often suffered from the whims of gods, but rarely was the cost so high, so enduring. Her sisters, Stheno and Uriel, the immortal Gorgons, are said to have lived with her in that faraway land. They too were fearsome, their cries so terrible that they could shatter the heart of any who heard them. Yet even with her sisters near, Medusa was different. Unlike them, she had once been human. Unlike them, she bore a punishment rather than a birthright. Their monstrosity was natural, woven into their being. Hers was a wound, a scar left by the hand of a goddess. And so, even among family, she must have felt alone. What was her daily life like, in that bleak exile? The myths are quiet on this point, but we can imagine. She may have walked the cliffs, listening to the cries of seabirds as they wheeled above. She may have sat by streams or caves, the hiss of her serpents blending with the rustle of leaves and grasses in the wind. She may have watched animals approach her, only to see them stiffen and still, transformed to statues at the first meeting of eyes. Over time, perhaps she stopped trying to interact at all, resigning herself to silence. To be feared is to be remembered, but it is not to be loved. Medusa became a figure whispered of in cautionary tales, a name spoken with dread. Hunters, warriors, and wanderers knew of her and avoided her lair. Yet, paradoxically, her exile gave her a strange kind of power. Though cursed, she was untouchable. Though alone, she was unassailable. Few dared challenge her, and those who did rarely lived to tell the tale. Her isolation was also her protection, wrapping her in a cocoon of terror that kept the world at bay. For those drifting into sleep with this story, it is easy to imagine the quiet of her exile. A cave at the edge of the sea, where waves crash endlessly against the rocks. The distant glow of starlight, flickering through the clouds. Medusa, seated on a stone, her head bowed, the serpents coiling softly around her shoulders. The air is heavy with loneliness, yet there is a strange peace too. For no one can harm her now. She has become her own sanctuary, her own prison, her own legend. Her fate, however, was not forgotten by the gods. Though Athena had cast her out, the goddess had also ensured that Medusa would not fade quietly into obscurity. Her existence became a trial for heroes, a riddle for adventurers, a looming threat at the edge of human imagination. For the Greeks, Medusa embodied fear itself, the dread of the unknown, the terror of looking upon something so powerful that it could undo you in an instant. Her exile was not just her punishment, it was also a stage upon which future legends would unfold. And so, Medusa waited. Days turned into years, years into generations. She endured, unchanged, her mortal body now sustained by the immortality of her curse. Time passed differently for her than for mortals. Kingdoms rose and fell, cities flourished and crumbled, but still she lived, hidden at the edges of the earth. Statues multiplied around her lair, remnants of those bold or reckless enough to approach. Animals, men, even the occasional wandering hero all found themselves frozen, their lifeless eyes staring out at the waves. Yet through it all, one truth remained: Medusa had not chosen this life. She had not sought power, nor begged for immortality. She had been given a curse, one she could neither escape nor undo. And in that exile, she became something far greater than she had ever been as a mortal priestess. She became a legend, an embodiment of the cruel balance between gods and humans. Her loneliness was profound, but her story was unforgettable. For us, listening now, there is a certain calm in imagining her exile. It is sorrowful, yes, but it is also still. The noise of the mortal world cannot reach her. The demands of temples and cities are far away. She exists in a kind of twilight, untouchable, eternal, her serpents whispering softly in the silence. This was her life, not joy, not love, but endurance. And in that endurance, she carved out a place in myth that would never fade. Though Medusa lived far away, cast into the desolate reaches of the world, her name did not fade into silence. Quite the opposite, it grew, carried on whispers, woven into songs, carved into stories told beside firelight. Even as she dwelled in solitude, the world beyond her lair became haunted by her memory. She was absent, yet present everywhere, an invisible shadow stretching across the imagination of mortals and gods alike. Fear, in the ancient world, was often given shape. To name a thing, to tell its story, was to make it real. And Medusa became one of the most potent shapes of fear. Travelers spoke of her with hushed voices. Some described her as so monstrous that even her shadow could kill. Others claimed she could fly upon the winds, hunting those who dared to speak her name aloud. Many exaggerated her form, some saying her teeth were as long as daggers, others insisting her tongue dripped poison, or that her breath alone could sicken the air. The further her story traveled, the more grotesque it became. But at the core of every tale was one unshakable truth: her gaze. It was her eyes, not her claws, not her fangs, not even her serpents, that filled listeners with dread. To meet Medusa's gaze was to be undone. Warriors who could fight lions, men who could wrestle giants, hunters who had slain beasts of impossible size, all were powerless before her glance. One look, and strength became stone. One heartbeat, and life became stillness. It was a fear more profound than the clash of swords, more permanent than the strike of thunderbolts. It was the fear of being turned into something less than alive, of becoming a statue, frozen forever at the very edge of life. The Greeks, who built temples filled with marble figures, found a strange poetry in this fate. To them, statues were not only art, they were memory, permanence, the attempt to preserve life against the tide of time. And so, when they imagined Medusa's victims scattered across cliffs and coasts, they saw not just death, but a strange kind of preservation. Each man who faced her became both defeated and eternal, trapped in stone yet spared from decay. This irony made her legend even more chilling. She did not kill as other monsters did. She immortalized her victims against their will. It was not only travelers and storytellers who spread her name. Artists too became captivated by her. Pottery and temple carvings bore her likeness: round face, wide eyes, tusk-like teeth in the earliest versions, later refined into a more sorrowful, tragic beauty framed by serpents. Shields bore her image, for warriors believed her face could frighten enemies before battle. Some even claimed that Athena herself, cold goddess of wisdom and war, wore the Gorgon's head upon her shield, turning Medusa's punishment into a weapon of divine power. In these depictions, Medusa's paradox grew sharper. She was both feared and used, shunned yet displayed, cursed and yet harnessed as a symbol of strength. Mortals might tremble at her story, but they painted her on walls and carried her on armor, as though her curse, once captured in art, could serve as protection. The world that cast her into exile could not let her go, for she had become more than a woman or a monster. She had become an idea, fear itself, held in human form. And yet, beneath all the layers of exaggeration and symbolism, her true tragedy was often forgotten. Few remembered the priestess who had once prayed in Athena's temple. Few remembered her innocence, or the injustice of her fate. In the retellings, Medusa ceased to be a victim. She became, instead, a challenge. A beast to be conquered, a trial for the strong, a test for heroes who wished their names to live on in legend. In this way, her curse was deepened. Not only had she been transformed into a monster, but her story was twisted into a warning, a tale of dread, stripped of compassion. Still, fear is a powerful storyteller. Parents used her name to frighten children into obedience. Sailors, setting out on uncertain waters, whispered prayers that they might never see her across the waves. Farmers warned one another not to wander too far, lest they stumble into the wilds where Medusa was said to roam. Even though she lived far beyond their reach, her shadow stretched into every corner of life. There is a strange comfort in imagining this. Medusa, sitting in silence in her desolate home, may not have known how large her presence had grown in the world she left behind. She may not have known that artists shaped her likeness into pottery, that warriors carried her image into battle, that her story was spoken in homes and temples far beyond the seas. To her, the world was empty, echoing only with the hiss of serpents. But to the Greeks, she was everywhere, her legend etched into memory as firmly as stone. And so her exile, though lonely, was not truly forgotten. Even as she lived in silence, her name was alive in the mouths of mortals. Even as she wandered, unseen, she haunted the imagination of entire generations. This is the paradox of Medusa, banished to the edges of the earth, yet present in every whisper of fear. For us, listening now in the quiet of the night, her story reminds us of the strange way fear can spread, how absence can become presence, how silence can become louder than sound. Medusa, in her solitude, became one of the most enduring figures of Greek myth, not because she sought power, but because she embodied the fears that dwell within every human heart: the fear of being powerless, the fear of being seen, the fear of becoming something other than ourselves. Her world was loneliness, but her memory became universal. And as the myths would soon tell, her story was not yet finished. For legends of heroes began to stir, and one day, a mortal would come seeking her not for worship, nor pity, but conquest. As Medusa lingered in her exile, feared and forgotten in equal measure, the world beyond her silent cliffs was alive with the rhythms of mortal life. Kingdoms rose and fell, ships sailed across restless seas, and heroes were born into stories that would outlast them. Among these heroes was one whose fate would become forever entwined with hers: Perseus, son of Danae, grandson of Acrisius, chosen by the gods themselves to face the Gorgon. Perseus's story, like Medusa's, begins not with triumph, but with a curse of its own. His mother, Danae, had been locked away in a bronze chamber by her father, King Acrisius of Argos. The king, fearful of a prophecy that his grandson would one day bring about his death, tried to seal her away from all men. Yet fate, in Greek mythology, could never be avoided. Zeus himself descended in a shower of golden light, and from this union Danae conceived a child. That child was Perseus, a mortal son of a god, destined for greatness and struggle. But Acrisius was not comforted. When the child was born, the king placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping the waves would take them far away. Instead, they drifted across the waters until they came to the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys rescued them. There, Perseus grew, not as a prince in a palace, but as a youth by the sea, raised in modesty and strength, his life shaped by hardship from the beginning. Seriphos, however, was not a place of peace forever. Its king, Polydex, grew envious and desired Danae for himself. Perseus, now grown, stood as her protector, unwilling to see his mother forced into the king's grasp. Polydex, cunning and cruel, devised a way to rid himself of the young man who stood in his path. He announced a banquet, claiming he wished to celebrate his supposed marriage, and demanded each guest bring him a gift of horses. Perseus, poor and unable to provide such a gift, boasted instead that he could bring the king anything, even the head of Medusa herself. Polydex seized upon this boast, turning it into a command. Whether through pride, trickery, or the weaving of fate, Perseus was now bound to an impossible task: to journey to the ends of the earth and return with the head of the Gorgon. A mission no mortal had yet survived. It is here that the quiet rhythm of Medusa's solitude begins to echo with destiny. For while she wandered alone in her desolate lair, her story was moving outward, pulling in new threads, weaving a tapestry that would bring hero and monster together. Perseus, untested and unprepared, would become the one chosen to confront her, though in truth he would never face her alone. The gods themselves had a hand in his journey. Athena, the very goddess who had cursed Medusa, lent her wisdom to Perseus, guiding him with divine foresight. Hermes, messenger of the gods, swift and cunning, granted him tools of travel and protection. To defeat the Gorgon was not merely a mortal's task, it was a mission ordained, a shaping of myth in which the gods played their part. Before Perseus could even hope to face Medusa, however, he needed to find her. This was no small feat, for her lair lay at the edge of the known world, beyond the rivers and seas, past the boundaries of maps. To guide him, Perseus was sent first to the Graeae, 3 ancient sisters who shared between them a single eye and a single tooth. They were keepers of secret knowledge, knowing the paths that led to the Gorgon's hidden dwelling. Perseus, with cunning and courage, stole their eye and refused to return it until they gave him the truth he sought. Reluctantly, they revealed the way. Armed with knowledge, Perseus then received the gifts that would allow him to survive. From Hermes came winged sandals, swift as the wind, so that he might travel across sea and sky. From Hades came the helm of invisibility, granting him concealment from even the deadliest gaze. From Hephaestus, the craftsman god, came a sword of unbreakable edge. And from Athena herself came the most important gift of all, a polished bronze shield, shining like a mirror, so that Perseus would not need to look directly at Medusa but could see her reflection safely. With these tools, Perseus set out, his fate sealed. Yet for all the gods' favor, he remained still a mortal, one who could bleed, one who could fail. His heart must have trembled as he neared the edge of the world, where silence lay heavy and shadows thickened. For though Medusa had become legend to most, to him she was about to become reality. The journey he undertook was not only one of distance but of spirit, carrying him from youth into the weight of destiny. For us, listening now, there is a strange calm in this unfolding. We know what lies ahead. We know that Perseus's path will lead him into Medusa's lair, that the stillness of her exile will be broken by the wings of his sandals, that her serpents will hiss in warning as he approaches. Yet at this stage of the story, all is still preparation, all is anticipation. The world waits, suspended, as hero and monster move closer toward one another. And in that waiting, there is contrast. Medusa, in her loneliness, untouched by time, cursed yet enduring. Perseus, in his youth, blessed with gifts, yet carrying the weight of mortal uncertainty. She, a figure of dread, avoided by all. He, a figure of hope, celebrated by gods and men. Two paths, seemingly opposite, yet drawn by fate into the same dark crossing. In myths, such crossings are inevitable. They remind us that no exile is permanent, no curse hidden forever. The stories that define us have a way of finding their resolution, whether through triumph or tragedy. For Medusa, it would mean the end of her silence. For Perseus, it would mean the beginning of his legend. And so the stage was set. The whispers of Medusa's name, which had haunted mortals for generations, were about to take form in the clash of hero and monster. Perseus, guided by gods, armed with gifts, carried his fate on winged sandals toward the lonely figure at the edge of the world. The world of men waited, the gods looked on, and Medusa, though she did not know it, was no longer alone. The journey to the lair of the Gorgons was no ordinary voyage. It was not like a soldier marching to war or a sailor charting a known course across the sea. Perseus's path led him beyond the familiar, into the edges of the world where maps faded into blankness and stories took their place. Each step carried him farther from the island where he had grown, farther from the warmth of his mother's protection, and deeper into a realm where gods, monsters, and shadows reigned. The gifts he carried weighed heavily, not in the hand but in the heart. The winged sandals from Hermes shimmered with every movement, carrying him lightly across lands where mortals rarely set foot. The helm of invisibility rested at his side, promising safety but reminding him also of the danger ahead. The polished shield from Athena gleamed in the light, a mirror that would guard him, yet a mirror that also whispered of the unspoken truth, that he could never look directly at the creature he was to face. Each gift was both a blessing and a reminder. Perseus was chosen, but he was chosen for a peril that few could endure. The world itself seemed to change as he traveled. Fields gave way to stony plains, forests thinned into twisted, leafless groves, and the skies darkened with a pallor that hinted at forgotten places. These were the lands beyond men's reach, lands where myths gathered like mists, where silence hung heavy and the ordinary laws of nature no longer held sway. The air grew colder, the nights longer, and the sense of being watched, though no eyes were seen, pressed constantly upon him. One can imagine the thoughts of Perseus as he journeyed. Did he doubt his own courage? Did he question the fairness of being cast into this trial for a boast made in pride? Did he wonder about Medusa, not as a monster, but as a being cursed by the gods, waiting in solitude? In myths, heroes often march forward with certainty, but in truth, the quiet moments of their journeys must have been filled with unease. Perseus, though armed and aided, was still human, young, mortal, uncertain. His sandals may have carried him swiftly, but the shadows of fear could not be left behind so easily. The world seemed to grow quieter the closer he drew to his destination. Animals no longer stirred in the underbrush, no birds circled in the skies. Even the winds stilled, as if the earth itself held its breath. Such stillness is unsettling, for it tells the traveler that he has entered a place not meant for human feet. In these hushed lands, Perseus pressed forward, the sound of his own breath and the soft beating of his heart becoming the only rhythm left. Myth tells us that the Gorgon's lair lay at the very edge of existence, in a place where night and day touched without blending, where seas broke upon black cliffs, and caves yawned wide like the mouths of forgotten gods. It was a threshold between the known and the unknowable, a liminal realm where the rules of men dissolved. This was where Medusa dwelled, her solitude unbroken until this moment, her silence about to be pierced. As Perseus approached, the gods who had granted him aid must have watched closely. Athena, stern and wise, guiding his hand. Hermes, swift and clever, ensuring his steps did not falter. Yet even their presence could not erase the solemn truth that the burden was his alone to carry. No divine gift could grant him courage, it could only give him the means to survive if he found it within himself. The shield of polished bronze glowed faintly as he lifted it, practicing how to look without looking, how to see without meeting the gaze that could turn him into stone. This practice, small and deliberate, was a meditation of its own, a way to calm the mind before the storm of confrontation. Each time he tilted the shield, he rehearsed not just the act of battle, but the act of survival, the delicate dance between fear and resolve. The path to the lair was not marked by signposts but by the growing sense of dread, the subtle transformation of the landscape into something hostile and sacred. Stone figures appeared along the way, statues, frozen mid-stride, their faces etched with terror. These were not the works of sculptors, but the remnants of lives once lived, mortals or wanderers who had stumbled too close to the Gorgon's gaze. Their presence was a silent warning to Perseus, a gallery of the fallen, showing him what awaited should he falter. And yet, within that stillness, Perseus pressed onward. The sandals carried him across jagged rocks, over yawning chasms, until at last he could hear it, the faint hiss of serpents. It was not the sound of wind, not the rustling of leaves, but the unmistakable whisper of living scales brushing against stone. That sound alone told him he had arrived. The lair of the Gorgon lay before him, shrouded in darkness, waiting. In this moment, the story balances on the edge of anticipation. Perseus stood outside the threshold, knowing that beyond lay the confrontation that had defined his journey. Behind him stretched the miles of hardship, the gods' aid, the warnings of those who came before. Before him waited Medusa, once maiden, now monster, her solitude about to shatter. There is a stillness here that feels eternal. In the quiet of his approach, we can pause with Perseus, feeling the weight of both fear and destiny. The story slows, like a breath held, the heartbeat suspended. This is the stillness before fate unfolds, the quiet edge where a mortal steps into legend. And so Perseus, armed with gifts, guided by gods, steadied his spirit and prepared to enter the darkness. The sandals fluttered softly at his feet, the shield gleamed faintly in his hand, and the hiss of serpents echoed faintly from within. The journey was over, the trial was about to begin. The entrance to the Gorgon's lair was unlike anything Perseus had ever seen. It yawned wide, carved into jagged cliffs at the very edge of the world, where the sea's waves crashed endlessly against stone. Dark mist curled around the mouth of the cavern, and a chill, not of wind but of some ancient presence, seeped into the air. Silence lay heavy here, the quiet so deep that every footstep seemed amplified, echoing as though the earth itself were listening. Even the sky above felt different, a muted gray that pressed downward, merging with shadow, blending day and night into a world apart. As Perseus stepped closer, his heart quickened, though outwardly he remained still. The gifts of the gods were at his side, but they could not still the pulse of fear within him. He knew what awaited, yet the mind often plays tricks in these moments, perhaps imagining the worst, perhaps expecting the impossible. The polished bronze shield in his hands reflected the darkness, a mirror to help him see without seeing, but the reflection could not remove the weight of knowing that behind it lay Medusa, a figure of power and terror, born of beauty twisted into wrath. The first glimpse came in the subtle shifts of shadow. A flicker of movement near the far wall of the cave, serpents curling over rock and stone. A hiss, soft but unmistakable, echoed in the cavern. Perseus froze, listening, feeling the air shift, as though it were alive and breathing with the monster itself. His sandals barely made a sound on the jagged stones, carrying him forward with the careful precision of someone stepping into legend. In the myths, Medusa's presence is described with both terror and a strange melancholy. She had once been human, once delicate and mortal, and now she dwelled among statues, serpents, and shadows. Her hissing hair coiled and uncoiled endlessly, a living crown of warning. Her eyes, though veiled in myth and terror, were deadly weapons, capable of turning any being to stone. Perseus could sense the weight of her power even before he saw her fully, and in that weight was a strange, reverent fear. The lair itself told its own story. Stone figures littered the cave, frozen in impossible postures, some men, some animals, some creatures whose forms were half-remembered, distorted in the panic of encountering Medusa. Each statue bore an expression of terror, astonishment, or desperation, and Perseus studied them with care. They were warnings, yes, but also a silent record of the Gorgon's life, the traces of encounters long past. In their stillness, he glimpsed the tragic reality. These were not just victims, but memorials, evidence of the lonely, terrible power that Medusa now wielded. Perseus breathed slowly, counting each inhalation, steadying himself. The helm of invisibility rested lightly at his side, and he remembered the instructions of Athena. He would not look directly at Medusa. Instead, he would rely on reflection, on cunning, on the tools given by the gods. His courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Each step brought him closer to her, each careful movement bringing him into the shadowed heart of the lair. The faint hiss of the serpents grew louder, more insistent. It was not a rush of anger, but a low, continuous whisper, a sound that seemed to resonate within the bones. Perseus could feel it vibrating in the soles of his feet, in the hollow of his chest. He imagined the movement of her hair, each snake coiling and uncoiling, the scales shimmering faintly in the light from the cave's entrance. The reflection in the shield would show her, yes, but never fully. It would offer only a safe glimpse, a mediated vision, and yet it was enough to know the enormity of what he faced. Time in the lair seemed different, stretched and thickened. Every second lingered, every heartbeat sounded like a drum in the quiet cavern. The air was heavy with the smell of stone, of water, of something older, something alive. Perseus moved like one dreaming, each step calculated, each breath measured, as though in a slow, inevitable ritual. He had come to the edge of the world, to the place where myth itself breathed. And then, in a quiet moment, he caught his first full reflection of Medusa. Her face appeared in the polished bronze, framed by the writhing snakes that had once been hair. She was not moving toward him, she was still, listening, perhaps aware of his presence, perhaps not. Her eyes, deadly in their potential, seemed to hold the weight of centuries, of exile, of suffering. Perseus felt the paradox of fear and pity intertwining in his chest. This was the monster of legend, yes, but also the cursed maiden, the priestess who had once prayed in Athena's temple. The contrast was stark. Here was the embodiment of terror, yet also the echo of tragedy. Medusa was alone, surrounded by the evidence of lives lost and stories interrupted. Perseus, approaching carefully, reflected on the cruel balance of fate. She had not chosen her curse, and yet here he was, chosen to confront her. The stillness of the lair, broken only by the hiss of serpents and the sound of his careful footsteps, made every detail sharper, more vivid. For those listening now, drifting toward sleep, the moment is heavy with anticipation but calm in its rhythm. The cave, the statues, the serpents, the silence, all contribute to a quiet tension, a suspended breath in the mythic night. Perseus stands on the threshold, shield in hand, heart steady, ready to step into legend. Medusa waits, still, serpentine hair coiling and uncoiling, her solitude about to meet the hero who has journeyed across the edge of the world. The scene lingers in memory. The hiss of serpents, the stillness of stone, the reflection in the shield, all of it builds a sense of wonder, dread, and melancholy. And yet, there is calm too. The story slows, stretching out in the quiet hours, allowing the imagination to rest in the tension, the anticipation, the delicate balance between hero and monster. Perseus took a slow, steadying breath, feeling the polished bronze shield in his hands. The reflection within it was all that separated him from disaster. Every hero in myth faces fear, but few face it as literally as he did. knowing that a single glance, a momentary lapse, could end him instantly. The shield would be his guide, his safeguard, and the mirror through which he would navigate the perilous edge of fate. He adjusted the shield, tilting it just enough to catch Medusa's image without meeting her gaze directly. The serpents writhed endlessly above her head, their scales shimmering faintly in the light that filtered into the cave. Some uncoiled, some coiled tighter, hissing softly, a sound that seemed to echo in every corner of the cavern. It was a language he could not understand, but one he felt deep in his bones, a warning, a rhythm, a pulse of life and danger. Perseus's heart beat steadily. It is said that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. And now he was acting with precision born of both mortal determination and divine guidance. Each step he took across the uneven stones of the lair was deliberate. His sandals, enchanted to carry him swiftly and silently, barely disturbed the ground beneath him. The slightest noise might betray him, might alert Medusa to his presence beyond what the mirror revealed. And yet he could not linger forever. The hero's moment had arrived, and with it came the weight of all that had preceded him, the guidance of Athena, the gifts of Hermes and Hades, the preparation of years and the silent encouragement of the gods themselves. The statues around him bore witness in frozen horror, their expressions etched into eternity. They were reminders of the stakes, the consequences of failure, and yet also markers of his path. Perseus moved among them, the mirror in front of his eyes reflecting Medusa's deadly form, her serpents hissing softly in the stillness. Every movement was measured. He could not rush, for speed could bring catastrophe. He could not hesitate, for hesitation could trap him in the cave forever. There was a strange rhythm to the approach. Inhale, step, adjust. Inhale, step, adjust. The quiet hiss of serpents filled the gaps between breaths. Perseus reminded himself that the reflection was all that mattered, that his life depended on careful observation rather than direct sight. In this mirror, Medusa became a puzzle to solve, a motion to anticipate, a force to respect rather than immediately attack. The hero's mind, sharpened by training and divine gifts, worked in harmony with his heart, steadying it against terror. The air in the lair was heavy, a mixture of stone, moisture, and some ancient power that seemed to linger like a ghost. Perseus could feel it pressing gently against his skin, soft yet insistent, a quiet tension that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. He moved slowly, each step a meditation on survival, on courage, on the inevitability of the confrontation. His shadow stretched across the floor, merging with the dark corners, reminding him that he was still mortal, still vulnerable, still fully in the grasp of fate. Medusa, meanwhile, remained largely still, a creature of both threat and solitude. Her serpents twisted in quiet energy, coiling and uncoiling with subtle menace. The reflection in the shield revealed her in partial detail, glimpses of her face framed by living snakes, the hint of eyes too powerful to see directly. Perseus had learned from myth that she was dangerous not only in movement but in presence. Stillness in her case was not safety, it was vigilance, patience, and an endless potential for destruction. Slowly, carefully, Perseus drew his sword, checking the edge, feeling the weight in his hands. It was not just a weapon, it was an extension of strategy, of thought, of patience. The polished bronze shield reflected not only Medusa's image but the surrounding cave, the frozen statues, the distance he had yet to cover. It allowed him to navigate the lair with both caution and purpose. The sword would strike only when the timing was perfect, when precision and strategy merged into one swift, controlled motion. Every sense was heightened. He could hear the faint drip of water echoing through the cavern, the soft shift of rock beneath his sandals, the subtle movements of Medusa's serpents. Each hiss and clink was both warning and guide. The silence between these sounds was equally important, filled with expectation and tension. He moved as if in a dream, the lair stretching around him, the statues observing silently, the serpents whispering their eternal warning. There was a paradox in this moment, a delicate balance between fear and control. Medusa was the embodiment of terror, a monster shaped by divine wrath, yet Perseus could approach her safely through caution, intelligence, and the gifts of gods. The quiet rhythm of movement, the mirrored reflection, the steady pulse of breath, all became part of the strategy. The confrontation had begun, though no swords had yet met flesh. It was the quiet, tense opening act of a mythic encounter, where the hero's intellect and nerves were as vital as any weapon. In this slow, meditative approach, the lair itself seemed alive, not hostile, but aware. The shadows shifted, the statues seemed to watch, and the air pulsed with the long, deep history of the cave. Perseus moved forward, step by step, mirroring in bronze the form of the monster ahead, trusting his training, his gifts, and the guidance of Athena. He was both predator and student, both mortal and participant in a story written by gods, and every measured motion brought him closer to the moment where myth would be realized. And so, in the quiet, Perseus pressed onward, shield raised, sword ready, sandals barely making a sound. Each breath measured, each step deliberate, every moment stretched with tension and care. He approached the threshold where reflection, strategy, and courage converged, prepared to face the monster that had haunted stories for generations. The confrontation had begun, not with a clash, but with stillness, reflection, and the steady, careful steps of a hero approaching the edge of legend. Perseus moved slowly, carefully, every step measured with the weight of the mission pressing upon him. The polished bronze shield caught faint flickers of light, revealing the writhing serpents that crowned Medusa's head. Each twist and hiss seemed almost hypnotic, a reminder that the monster before him was more than legend. She was living, breathing, cursed, and powerful. The cave itself seemed to hold its breath, the shadows stretching long across the stone floor, echoing with the unspoken stories of those who had come before. He steadied the sword in his hand, feeling the balance, the edge, the cold metal that had been forged for moments like this. The blade was an extension of strategy, of divine guidance, of human courage. Perseus knew that the strike must be exact, deliberate, perfect in timing. Any hesitation, any miscalculation, could end him instantly. He inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of the lair, the hiss of serpents, the stillness of the statues surrounding them, and allowed his mind to focus on the singular purpose that had brought him here. The reflection in the bronze shield was his guide. Medusa's gaze, deadly and absolute, could not be met directly. In the mirror, Perseus could see her movements, anticipate her reactions, and time his strike. The serpents above her head twitched, sensing the presence of the intruder, yet she did not move toward him. Her silence was both caution and curiosity, a quiet observation from a being who had known solitude for so long that intruders were rare and heroes rarer still. Slowly, inch by inch, Perseus advanced, guided by reflection, by breath, and by the rhythm of fear controlled. Each step was deliberate, each movement part of a careful choreography between mortal courage and divine aid. The cave's silence pressed upon him, broken only by the soft hissing of snakes and the faint echo of his own sandals against stone. Time seemed to stretch, as though the world itself had slowed to witness the delicate balance of predator and prey, hero and monster. Finally, he was within reach, the mirror showing the form he needed to strike. His sword rose, poised for a swift, precise blow. Medusa remained still, serpents coiling in restless anticipation, the shadows of the lair dancing across the edges of perception. Perseus exhaled, letting the air carry away hesitation, letting the calm focus of preparation guide him. The moment was absolute, perfect stillness, perfect timing, the culmination of all the journey, all the gifts, all the divine and mortal effort that had led to this point. With a swift, controlled motion, the sword descended. The strike was not hasty, not chaotic, but exact. The edge found its mark, the reflection guiding the hand that would deliver both justice and tragedy. In that instant, the long solitude of Medusa ended. Her form, immortal and cursed, was finally met by mortal intervention. There was no scream, no fury, only the swift, quiet resolution of destiny carried out. The hissing of serpents momentarily stilled, the statues seemed to hold their breath, and the cave exhaled a timeless sigh. Even in victory, the moment was tinged with sorrow. Medusa had not chosen her fate, nor the lives of those turned to stone. She had endured centuries of isolation, the weight of divine wrath, and the silent watch of her surroundings. Perseus, though victorious, could not erase the tragedy that had defined her existence. In myth, heroes succeed, monsters are defeated, yet beneath every tale lies the shadow of loss, the quiet echo of suffering endured. The Gorgon was gone, yet her story remained, frozen in memory, in legend, and in the stones of the lair. Perseus stepped back, catching his breath, feeling the weight of what had been accomplished. The lair seemed less oppressive now, the shadows less threatening, though the statues remained, silent witnesses to the encounter. He had succeeded, yet the calm that followed was reflective rather than triumphant. In this quiet aftermath, one can sense the interplay of power, fate, and mortality. The hero had acted, the monster had fallen, and the world would remember both, intertwined in myth for all generations to come. Carefully, Perseus gathered the head of Medusa, the source of fear now contained, yet still potent. Even in death, in separation from the body, her gaze retained its power. He held the head with reverence, understanding that this artifact was both a weapon and a symbol. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between mortal action and divine will, between courage and consequence, between the fleeting lives of humans and the enduring presence of myth. As he prepared to leave the cave, Perseus reflected on the lessons hidden in the encounter. Medusa, though feared, had been wronged by the gods. Her solitude, her exile, and the curse she bore were not of her choosing. Yet even in this tragic fate, she embodied strength and endurance, qualities that would ensure her memory lived on far beyond the cave. The statues remained, the echoes of her life and curse immortalized in stone, while the hero carried forward both the trophy and the tale. The journey back from the lair was slower, quieter, each step measured with reflection. Perseus moved through the landscapes of myth, carrying not only Medusa's head but the weight of understanding. The gods' gifts had guided him, his own courage had sustained him, and yet the encounter left a lingering awareness of the fragile, often tragic intersection between power and humanity. The wind, the stones, the shadows, they all seemed to acknowledge what had passed in the quiet depths of the cave. In the stillness of the night, we can imagine Perseus walking among the statues, the head of Medusa safely contained, each hiss and coil of the serpents now a distant echo. The tale of heroism is complete, yet the echo of tragedy lingers. The myth does not simply celebrate victory, but the careful navigation of fear, the respect for power, the mindfulness of consequence, and the quiet endurance of those who are wronged yet remembered. Thus ends the confrontation. The lair, once a place of terror and solitude, is now the site of resolution. Perseus survives, guided by gods and strategy, but he carries with him an awareness of the weight of his actions. Medusa's legacy continues, immortal in story, in statues, and in memory. And in the calm, reflective way of these bedtime myths, we can imagine the echoes of the cave, the soft hissing of snakes, and the slow rhythm of breath that marks the passage of both hero and legend. With Medusa's head safely contained, Perseus began the slow, deliberate journey out of the lair. The cave, once alive with hissing serpents and oppressive silence, now seemed quieter, as though it too were exhaling after the long tension of the encounter. Shadows stretched and shifted with every step, flickering across the stone statues that bore witness to the life and curse of the Gorgon. Perseus moved cautiously, aware that even in death, the head he carried retained its lethal power. One careless glance could turn stone to flesh no longer, yet the potential for disaster lingered like a whisper in the corners of the mind. The statues around him, frozen in expressions of terror and despair, seemed to watch his retreat. They were reminders of the caution necessary, evidence of the countless lives shaped or ended by Medusa's curse. Each careful step felt measured against this history, a balance of mortal courage and divine guidance. Perseus knew that the world outside the cave awaited him, yet the transition from the haunted interior to the uncertain expanse beyond required patience and respect for the forces he carried with him. The winged sandals from Hermes allowed him to move swiftly across the uneven stone, yet their soft, silent movement only heightened the tension. He was aware of every small sound, every shift of air, every subtle vibration beneath his feet. The helm of invisibility, resting lightly at his side, offered protection from prying eyes, though he had no enemies yet in sight. Athena's polished shield reflected the shadows of the cave, guiding his path and offering reassurance that he need not look directly at the danger he carried. In this intricate dance, Perseus navigated the threshold between triumph and peril, between the mortal and the divine. Outside, the world felt both familiar and strange. The cliffs, the crashing waves, the grey sky stretching endlessly overhead, All were ordinary in their elements, yet transformed by the lingering presence of myth. Perseus moved along the rocky coastline with deliberate care, the sea spray cooling his skin, the wind tugging gently at his cloak. Each gust reminded him that he was not only carrying a trophy but a responsibility, a force that could reshape reality if handled carelessly. Even in victory, his caution was paramount. As he journeyed, Perseus reflected on Medusa herself. She had been a creature of both terror and tragedy, cursed through no fault of her own. Her solitude, her wrath, and her enduring power spoke of the delicate balance between divine justice and cruelty. Though her head now rested in his possession, he could not erase the memory of the hissing serpents, the twisting hair, or the statues that had frozen mid-stride. The encounter left an impression beyond fear, an awareness of the consequences of divine intervention and the human capacity for courage in the face of overwhelming danger. The world seemed to sense the lingering tension. Birds did not stir, waves crashed with a peculiar resonance, and even the stones beneath his feet seemed to hum faintly with the echo of Medusa's presence. Perseus moved like one walking through a suspended moment, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The quiet rhythm of motion allowed him to navigate the lingering threat, balancing the triumph of survival with the weight of responsibility that accompanied the Gorgon's head. The journey was not without challenges. Though the cave and immediate surroundings were behind him, the edge of the world remained a place of liminality and danger. He crossed jagged cliffs and treacherous shores, feeling the subtle pull of currents, the unstable footing beneath him, and the invisible forces that seemed to linger around the cursed artifact. The hissing of Medusa's serpents occasionally echoed faintly in the air, a reminder that even in death, her power was not entirely diminished. Perseus maintained focus, knowing that any lapse in attention could result in irreversible consequences. He paused often, allowing the air to fill his lungs and steady his heart. The winged sandals lifted him effortlessly above dangerous terrain, yet he remained grounded in awareness, listening to the whispers of the sea and the distant cries of seabirds. The helm of invisibility offered occasional concealment from curious eyes, though no mortal dared approach the remote coast. The shield reflected not only the path but the vigilance necessary to survive the journey home. Each movement was a meditation in action, a slow unfolding of caution and strategy in tandem with physical effort. The night deepened as he traveled, the sky stretching into endless shades of gray and silver. Stars began to twinkle faintly, their distant light offering both guidance and quiet companionship. The moon reflected off the water, casting long, trembling shadows across the stones and cliffs. Perseus's journey became a rhythm of shadow, reflection, and motion. Even in the quiet, the tension of what he carried remained palpable, an invisible weight pressing lightly against the edges of consciousness. As he drew closer to Seriphos, home once again felt both near and impossibly distant. Memories of his mother, of the humble fisher's life he had known, surfaced softly in the mind, reminding him of the fragility and preciousness of life. The encounter with Medusa had transformed him, not only through triumph but through understanding, the delicate interplay of fear, courage, and the consequences of wielding power. Every careful step, every measured breath, echoed the lessons of patience and mindfulness that had carried him this far. Finally, as dawn approached, Perseus looked back at the cliffs and the cave that had housed Medusa. A strange mixture of relief, reverence, and lingering caution filled him. He had survived where others had failed, conquered a monster without succumbing to fear, and carried the essence of her power safely into the mortal world. Yet he knew that myths do not end simply with victory. They linger, shaping the imagination, the stories, and the cautionary tales passed from one generation to the next. The return journey was quiet, reflective, and purposeful. Each step toward Seriphos carried him through landscapes now imbued with the memory of his trials. The winged sandals allowed him to move with grace, yet the weight of what he carried remained ever present. The sea, the stones, the distant horizon, all were witnesses to his careful navigation of fate, strategy, and courage. And in the quiet of the early morning, as Perseus moved steadily onward, the world seemed to acknowledge the delicate balance achieved. Medusa's power remained, preserved in the artifact, yet the hero's careful actions ensured that it would be used wisely. The lair, the statues, the shadows, all faded behind him, leaving only the rhythm of movement, the gentle sound of wind and water, and the steady, reflective steps of a mortal hero walking back from the edge of myth. The journey back to Seriphos was quiet but charged with a sense of purpose. Perseus moved with the winged sandals carrying him effortlessly across land and sea, yet his mind remained focused on the final task that awaited him, confronting King Polydex, the man whose desire for Danae had set this chain of events into motion. Though the Gorgon's head was a weapon of immense power, he understood that careful planning, patience, and precise timing were essential. Even a hero armed with divine gifts could not act rashly, and Perseus knew that the final moments of this myth required the same caution and deliberation that had guided him through the lair. As the familiar coastline of Seriphos emerged on the horizon, Perseus's thoughts drifted to his mother. Danae had been isolated, cast away, and vulnerable in the hands of a king driven by desire and envy. He had watched her struggle against Polydex's manipulations, and now, after his journey to the edge of the world and back, he carried the power to end that injustice. Yet, even with Medusa's head in his possession, he approached with care. Power without strategy could be dangerous, and Perseus understood that the weapon he bore could harm not only the guilty but the innocent if misused. Polydex awaited at the palace, unaware of how swiftly fate had shifted. The king's arrogance had grown over time, his confidence built on the assumption that Perseus would remain powerless, bound by mortal limitations. But Perseus's journey had changed everything. He had faced the impossible, acted with courage and precision, and returned not only alive but armed with the divine tools to restore balance. The calm rhythm of his approach contrasted sharply with the king's unchecked hubris, highlighting the tension between mortal folly and heroic preparation. As Perseus entered the palace grounds, the winged sandals moved silently across stone floors and corridors. The air, filled with the faint scent of sea and stone, carried a quiet expectation. Courtiers and guards, accustomed to Polydex's commands, noticed the calm authority in Perseus' movements, sensing that something extraordinary had occurred. Every step seemed measured, deliberate, a rhythm of anticipation and controlled power that reflected not only his triumph over Medusa but the disciplined focus that had guided him throughout his journey. The confrontation with Polydex unfolded like a slow, inevitable dance. The king, seated arrogantly on his throne, could scarcely comprehend the magnitude of what Perseus now commanded. The winged sandals allowed the hero to close distance effortlessly, yet he did so with careful deliberation. The polished bronze shield caught the faint light from windows and reflected it toward the king, a subtle reminder of the precision and control that had guided Perseus' journey. Even without raising Medusa's head, the calm authority of the hero was enough to unsettle the once proud king. When Perseus finally revealed the Gorgon's head, the effect was immediate and absolute. Polydex, who had relied on intimidation and status to control those around him, now faced a power beyond mortal comprehension. The head, still potent even after Medusa's death, radiated a quiet, lethal authority. Perseus held it steadily, ensuring that the king's gaze met the reflection, not the direct image, yet the weight of consequence was undeniable. The statuesque stillness that followed marked the climax of the confrontation, a moment where divine intervention, human courage, and precise strategy intersected perfectly. Danae, watching from a nearby chamber, felt a mixture of relief and awe. Her son, once cast into the sea as an infant, had returned transformed, not only as a hero but as a guardian, capable of defending both herself and the moral balance of their lives. The tension of years of fear and uncertainty dissolved slowly as she witnessed the quiet authority and calm decisiveness with which Perseus handled the situation. The palace, once a place of oppression, became a stage for the resolution of long-held anxieties and the restoration of justice. Even in victory, the atmosphere remained reflective rather than celebratory. Perseus did not revel in the king's fate but carried out his role with solemnity and care. This was the nature of myths: triumph tempered by awareness, action guided by understanding, and power exercised with restraint. The Gorgon's head, while a tool of immense force, was used sparingly and thoughtfully. Every motion, every step, every glance was deliberate, a meditation in action that preserved both justice and humility. The aftermath of the confrontation allowed Perseus and Danae to reconnect, their bond strengthened by shared trials and the hero's unwavering courage. The palace, once a place of tension and fear, became a space of quiet resolution. Statues, empty halls, and corridors bore witness to the subtle power of preparation, the careful exercise of divine and mortal gifts, and the importance of strategy over brute force. In this calm, reflective aftermath, one could appreciate the delicate interplay of courage, wisdom, and restraint that defined the conclusion of the story. Perseus then ensured that Polydectes' threat was neutralized permanently. Using Medusa's head with careful precision, he ensured the king could harm no one further. The hero's actions were deliberate and controlled, emphasizing a measured response rather than impulsive vengeance. This balance of power and responsibility underscored the lessons inherent in myth, that strength without wisdom can be dangerous, and that courage tempered by understanding is the foundation of true heroism. Finally, Perseus and Danae left the palace grounds together, moving quietly through the early morning streets of Seriphos. The wind carried the faint scent of sea and stone, and the world seemed to acknowledge the shift in fate. Statues, shadows, and lingering echoes of tension softened under the calm rhythm of their steps. Perseus had completed not only a personal journey but a moral one, restoring justice and balance to a situation long marred by greed and desire. In this quiet, reflective walk, the myth settles into memory. The hero has acted with courage, precision, and wisdom. The mother has been rescued, the tyrant's arrogance humbled, and the power of the divine gifts applied thoughtfully. The narrative, while filled with tension and potential peril, concludes in calm resolution, emphasizing the careful, deliberate choices that define both heroism and myth. The echoes of this story linger, not as noise, but as gentle reminders of courage, strategy, and the reflective power of thoughtful action. With Polydectes defeated and Danae safely restored to her home, Perseus paused to consider the journey that had carried him from mortal uncertainty to heroic accomplishment. The events with Medusa, though filled with peril and terror, left more than the thrill of victory. They left lessons, echoes, and reflections that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Medusa's head, still potent in its power, served as a tangible reminder of both triumph and tragedy, a symbol that even in the act of conquering, one must remain mindful of consequences. The cave, the statues, the hissing serpents, these were images and sounds that lingered in Perseus' mind. Each detail carried weight, not as mere obstacles overcome, but as reminders of a deeper reality. Medusa had not chosen her fate, she had been cursed unjustly, and her isolation was both punishment and protection. In confronting her, Perseus had exercised caution, strategy, and courage, yet he also bore witness to a tragic life transformed into legend. The balance between heroism and empathy became clear. A hero does not merely act, but understands, reflects, and respects the world, even in victory. Medusa's legacy extended beyond the immediate threat she posed. Her story, preserved in myth, would endure for generations, a cautionary tale of divine wrath, mortal curiosity, and the fine line between human ambition and arrogance. Her image, half monster, half maiden, crowned with serpents, remained powerful in the imagination, a reminder of both danger and consequence. Perseus, carrying her head with care, became a participant in this legacy, bridging the gap between mortal hero and the enduring force of myth. The reflective calm following the confrontation allowed Perseus to see the nuances of power. Strength alone is fleeting. It is strategy, awareness, and thoughtful action that define true accomplishment. He had wielded divine gifts, yet it was his judgment, patience, and restraint that ensured the proper resolution. The Gorgon's head was not a tool of recklessness, but of measured consequence, a lesson in responsibility that extended far beyond the immediate narrative. Myth, after all, is not merely about action, but the reflection and insight gained from it. In the quiet moments with Danae, Perseus considered the balance between mortal lives and the forces of divine will. His mother's relief and gratitude were profound, yet tempered with awareness of the risks they had both faced. Together, they understood that the world was shaped not only by heroism but also by circumstance, by the caprice of gods, and by the choices of mortals navigating extraordinary circumstances. The interplay of fate and free will, of power and empathy, created a tapestry of lessons woven into the very fabric of their story. Even as Perseus moved through the familiar landscapes of Seriphos, the echoes of his journey lingered. The sea, the cliffs, the forests, Each became imbued with the memory of trials, courage, and reflection. The hero's path was not a simple return, but a continuation of understanding, the quiet recognition that myths carry moral, philosophical, and emotional weight alongside their fantastical elements. The serenity of the landscape, juxtaposed with the drama of the events he had endured, offered a reflective rhythm that reinforced the lessons of the journey. Medusa's story also held a cautionary element for those who would come after. She was a warning of unchecked divine power, of curses imposed without recourse, and of the isolation that can arise from fear and misunderstanding. Yet, she was also a symbol of endurance, of existence that persisted even under the harshest conditions. Perseus, by approaching with care and intelligence, respected this duality. His actions honored both the danger she represented and the humanity she retained, reminding us that myths are rarely about simple good or evil. They dwell in the gray, the complex, the morally intricate. The hero's reflection extended beyond personal accomplishment to the broader implications of myth. Every statue in Medusa's lair, every stone frozen in terror, was evidence of lives touched by forces beyond their control. Perseus had navigated these forces with precision, yet the memory of those impacted remained a quiet reminder of responsibility. Heroism, then, is not merely about victory. It is about mindfulness, about understanding the ripple effects of action, about seeing beyond immediate outcomes to the enduring consequences. Even the passage of time was marked by reflection. The story of Medusa and Perseus, when told, would be remembered not only for the excitement of the confrontation but for the calm, deliberate, and measured approach that defined it. Each retelling would carry the weight of consideration, teaching listeners that courage is best paired with understanding, that power without wisdom can be destructive, and that every encounter, no matter how fantastical, carries lessons for those willing to observe deeply. In moments of quiet, one could imagine Perseus alone, perhaps by the sea, looking toward the horizon where sky met water. The sun might rise, casting gentle light on the waves, reflecting the calm after the storm of his journey. In these moments, the hero would contemplate the lessons learned, the importance of patience, strategy, empathy, and the humility required to face forces beyond ordinary human control. The journey with Medusa was complete, yet its teachings persisted, woven into the fabric of both mortal experience and mythic tradition. Thus, the aftermath of Medusa's defeat was not only a celebration of victory but also a meditation on legacy, responsibility, and reflection. The hero had acted, justice had been restored, and the lessons of myth had been preserved. Medusa, though defeated, remained immortal in story, a cautionary, tragic, and powerful figure. Perseus, returning to the world of mortals, carried with him both the tangible symbol of her head and the intangible wisdom gleaned from the encounter. In this calm, reflective space, the story lingers as it should in the quiet hours, a balance of tension and release, of triumph and contemplation, of power exercised thoughtfully and heroism tempered with empathy. The narrative gently settles into memory, leaving the listener with a sense of both awe and serenity. And in the quiet that follows, one can feel the lingering presence of myth itself, a reminder that courage, wisdom, and reflection are timeless companions, as relevant in the mortal world as they are in the tales whispered across generations. With Danae safely by his side and Polydectes' tyranny ended, Perseus began the final stretch of his journey back to the familiar landscapes of his youth. The winged sandals carried him effortlessly over hills, across rivers, and above the jagged cliffs that bordered Seriphos, yet every moment of flight and every step on solid ground felt steeped in reflection. The trials he had faced, the terror of Medusa's lair, the delicate balance of strategy and courage, the confrontation with mortal greed, were not simply challenges to overcome, they were lessons etched into memory, shaping the hero he had become. The journey home was quiet, punctuated only by the rhythm of breath and the soft sound of wind passing through the air. The sea below shimmered faintly in the early morning light, waves lapping against rocks with a gentle, hypnotic cadence. Each crest and trough mirrored the highs and lows of his journey, the exhilaration of adventure, the tension of danger, the calm deliberation of careful planning. In this reflective space, Perseus considered the nature of heroism, recognizing that it was not defined solely by triumph, but by the patience, empathy, and understanding that allowed a mortal to navigate extraordinary circumstances. Even the weight of Medusa's head, safely contained yet potent, reminded him of the responsibilities that accompany power. It was a symbol of his success, yes, but also of restraint and reflection. The journey with this artifact in hand was not a simple flight home. It was a meditation on control, on the careful use of force, and on the understanding that every action carries consequences beyond the immediate moment. Perseus, though young in years, had learned that true heroism is intertwined with wisdom and mindfulness. Danae, walking beside him, observed quietly, sensing the transformation in her son. The boy who had been cast into the sea as an infant now returned as a figure of measured strength and reflective courage. She could feel the calm determination in his movements, the careful deliberation in his gaze, and the weight of experiences that had expanded his understanding beyond mortal bounds. The journey was as much for her as it was for him, a slow return to safety, a gentle reconnect with the familiar, and a time to contemplate the extraordinary events that had unfolded. As they traveled, Perseus reflected on the delicate interplay of fate and choice. The gods had provided gifts and guidance, yet it was his own courage, planning, and empathy that had ensured success. Every step forward was a testament to the balance of divine intervention and mortal responsibility. The myth itself was a tapestry of interwoven forces, the caprice of gods, the strength of the human spirit, and the weight of consequence carried by all involved. This reflection, slow and deliberate, allowed Perseus to inhabit both the story and its lessons simultaneously, a rare perspective reserved for those who have faced trials beyond ordinary understanding. The landscapes they passed through seemed transformed by the journey. Hills rolled gently beneath the sun's early glow, rivers sparkled with reflective clarity, and forests whispered softly in the wind. Each natural element seemed attuned to the rhythm of the hero's thoughts, a serene accompaniment to contemplation. The hero's flight across land and sea, while swift in distance, felt measured in time, a slow unfolding of insight, a meditation on the events that had defined the past days. Even the occasional cries of birds or the rustle of leaves contributed to a reflective cadence, a rhythm in which the story of Perseus and Medusa could settle into the mind. Perseus also thought of the lives affected by his actions. Medusa, Polydex, Danae, the stone figures in the Gorgon's lair, each represented a different facet of consequence. Heroism, he realized, was not merely about victory or physical prowess. It was about awareness, reflection, and the careful consideration of the outcomes of one's deeds. Even those turned to stone, though victims of circumstance, became silent teachers, reminders of the responsibility inherent in power and the delicate balance between action and consequence. The flight over the open sea offered moments of solitude, allowing Perseus to contemplate the broader lessons of myth. The gods' gifts, the dangers faced, and the careful execution of strategy combined to form a narrative that extended beyond immediate survival. Myths endure because they teach, not only through spectacle but through reflection. The story of Perseus and Medusa was not just an adventure, it was an exploration of courage, empathy, restraint, and the profound consequences that accompany the wielding of extraordinary power. Even as the familiar coastline of Seriphos came into view, Perseus remained reflective, understanding that the end of the journey was not an end to the lessons learned. Heroism was ongoing, a continuous practice of awareness, patience, and mindful action. The quiet rhythm of waves against the shore mirrored the inner calm that he had cultivated, the stillness born from careful strategy and the acknowledgement of forces beyond mortal control. The journey had transformed him, yet its teachings would remain, ready to guide future decisions and actions. Finally, as they approached the familiar dwellings of Seriphos, Perseus allowed a gentle sense of relief to wash over him. The immediate dangers were past, yet the narrative of experience lingered, shaping his understanding of the world and his place within it. The wind carried the scent of sea and stone, the early morning sun softened the harsh outlines of cliffs and buildings, and the rhythmic cadence of movement offered a lull of calm. It was in this serene return that the hero could fully integrate the lessons of his journey, courage exercised wisely, power tempered with reflection, and the enduring presence of myth as a guide for understanding both mortal and divine forces. In these final moments, the journey home became more than a physical return, it was a meditation on fate, heroism, and responsibility. Perseus had faced the extraordinary, navigated danger with precision, and returned with not only victory but insight. Every breath, every step, every movement in the quiet morning reflected a balance between action and contemplation, strength and restraint, mortal courage and divine influence. The journey home, calm and reflective, offered a final space for the story to settle into memory, leaving both hero and listener with a sense of quiet understanding and serene closure. Perseus' journey, though personal in its stakes, had ripples far beyond himself and the immediate people he sought to protect. The myth of Medusa and the hero who confronted her became more than a tale of adventure. It became a story that shaped the imagination of generations, a reminder of the delicate interplay between courage, wisdom, and consequence. Even as Perseus walked the familiar shores of Seriphos, carrying both the weight of experience and the tangible power of Medusa's head, the wider significance of his actions settled quietly in the landscape of myth. Every act of heroism carries echoes, and Perseus' triumph over Medusa was no exception. Statues, frozen by the curse of the Gorgon, were silent witnesses to a balance restored. Polydec's defeat symbolized the fall of tyranny and greed, yet it also underscored the idea that even in victory, reflection, restraint, and morality are essential companions to strength. Myths endure because they teach more than bravery. They teach judgment, responsibility, and the consequences of wielding power. Perseus' careful navigation of both mortal and divine challenges became a blueprint for understanding the human capacity to act wisely in extraordinary circumstances. The stories of Perseus spread quietly at first, whispered among villagers, travelers, and those who had witnessed the subtle transformations of Seriphos. Over time, these accounts wove themselves into the broader tapestry of Greek mythology, influencing not only the perception of heroes but the understanding of monsters, curses, and divine intervention. Medusa, once a figure of terror, became a symbol of both danger and tragedy, her story intertwined with lessons about justice, empathy, and the limitations of mortal comprehension. Perseus, in navigating her lair, demonstrated that heroism is as much about careful thought as it is about action. Even in the way stories are told, the ripple effect is apparent. Artists and poets, inspired by the delicate balance of terror and tragedy in Medusa's tale, depicted her image, capturing both her monstrous form and the human elements of her suffering. Sculptors created statues that echoed the frozen horror of her victims, while storytellers emphasized the calm, measured heroism of Perseus, illustrating how strategy, courage, and divine guidance converge to produce a narrative both thrilling and contemplative. In this way, the myth extended beyond the personal realm, embedding itself in culture, morality, and memory. The influence of Perseus' actions also shaped the perception of divine interaction in human affairs. Gifts from Hermes, Athena, and other gods were not merely magical tools. They represented guidance, responsibility, and the subtle expectations placed upon mortals who dare to confront extraordinary challenges. The careful integration of these gifts into his strategy highlighted the necessity of mindfulness when wielding power beyond ordinary reach. Generations would reflect on this aspect, learning that success requires more than force. It requires awareness, empathy, and the integration of wisdom with action. Communities in Seriphos and beyond began to see the subtle transformations left by the events. The oppressive fear of Polydec's rule dissipated, replaced by the quiet understanding that courage and calculated action can restore balance. Danae's safety became a symbol of the rewards of perseverance and the importance of justice tempered with restraint. Even the natural world, the cliffs, the shorelines, the whispering forests, seemed to echo the calm authority of a hero who had acted with integrity. These landscapes, once neutral or threatening, became living reminders of the interplay between human action and mythic consequence. Medusa's head, though kept safely and respectfully, continued to influence events in subtle ways. Its power, though contained, reminded mortals of the duality inherent in heroism, the capacity to protect, to correct injustice, and yet the need for careful, thoughtful restraint. Perseus' decisions in handling the artifact demonstrated to future generations that responsibility is inseparable from power. The story of Medusa and Perseus thus became a meditation not only on courage but also on ethical judgment, echoing across time in quiet, contemplative ways. Even the broader mythic landscape of Greece was subtly shaped by these events. Heroes who came later, inspired by Perseus' courage, learned that strategy, intelligence, and empathy are essential complements to physical prowess. Myths were often moral maps, and the narrative of Perseus navigating fear, danger, and divine guidance provided a blueprint for understanding the nuanced nature of heroism. The cautionary elements of Medusa's curse, combined with the hero's careful handling of power, underscored lessons that transcended time, geography, and generations of listeners. In reflective moments, one could imagine Perseus walking along quiet shores, the early morning light brushing the edges of the cliffs, waves murmuring against the stone, carrying the calm resonance of what had been accomplished. The myth settled gently into memory, a story that could inspire both awe and contemplation. It taught that even extraordinary power must be tempered with wisdom, that triumph is meaningful only when paired with reflection, and that the lessons embedded in myth endure far longer than the fleeting events of human life. The hero's influence also extended into the imagination of those who never witnessed his deeds. Through storytelling, illustration, and memory, the journey of Perseus shaped perceptions of morality, bravery, and consequence. The myth carried both the thrill of adventure and the serenity of careful reflection, a duality that ensured its lasting resonance. Medusa's story, intertwined with Perseus' strategy and courage, became a reminder that even monsters serve as teachers, cautioning mortals about the complexity of power, fate, and human action. And so, the wider impact of Perseus' actions settled into the world gently, persistently, and profoundly. Communities learned about courage, prudence, and responsibility. Artists immortalized the delicate balance of terror and heroism. Philosophers reflected on the lessons embedded in mythic narrative. Even the quiet natural world seemed imbued with the rhythm of reflection and the presence of enduring consequence. The ripple of heroism, calm and deliberate, extended far beyond the individual, shaping the cultural memory of generations, teaching the timeless interplay of courage, wisdom, and empathy. The story of Perseus did not end with his return to Seriphos or even with the defeat of Polydex. Instead, it unfolded slowly, quietly, across generations, leaving a legacy that extended far beyond the immediate events of the hero's journey. Myths, after all, are not static. They are living narratives, shaped by memory, retelling, and interpretation. Perseus' deeds, though rooted in mortal courage and divine aid, became a template for heroism, strategy, and moral awareness. They influenced not only his contemporaries but countless generations of storytellers, artists, philosophers, and listeners who drew lessons from his careful navigation of danger, power, and responsibility. The influence of Perseus was visible in the fabric of Greek mythology itself. Later heroes, encountering challenges of equal or greater magnitude, often mirrored his blend of courage, intelligence, and restraint. These narratives emphasize that heroism is not simply a matter of strength or impulsive action, but a careful balance of preparation, foresight, and reflection. Perseus had shown that the ability to survive extraordinary circumstances relies on patience and understanding as much as it does on bravery. In this way, his journey served as a moral and strategic compass for those who would follow in his footsteps, shaping expectations of what it meant to act wisely in the face of danger. Artists and poets carried the story into the visual and literary realms, embedding Perseus' image and deeds in the cultural memory of Greece and beyond. Sculptures of the hero holding Medusa's head appeared in temples and public spaces, not as mere representations of conquest, but as symbols of the delicate interplay between power and responsibility. Painters and storytellers highlighted moments of reflection and careful action, reminding audiences that the hero's greatest strength lay not solely in physical prowess, but in his ability to balance courage with prudence. These artistic interpretations helped ensure that Perseus' lessons would endure in ways both subtle and profound. The moral resonance of the myth also contributed to philosophical and ethical reflections. Scholars and thinkers explored the implications of the hero's choices, meditating on the necessity of restraint when wielding power, the consequences of vengeance versus justice, and the responsibility inherent in acts that affect others. Perseus' story became a narrative case study in the ethical exercise of strength, demonstrating that the consequences of one's actions ripple outward, touching lives both immediately and across generations. In quiet contemplation, one could perceive the enduring wisdom encoded in his journey. Courage paired with reflection produces outcomes that honor both justice and empathy. Even the myth of Medusa, intertwined with Perseus' legacy, carried enduring lessons. Her story, filled with tragedy and divine injustice, offered a cautionary perspective that great power, if unbalanced or misdirected, can result in suffering and fear. Yet, through Perseus' measured response and careful handling of her head, the narrative demonstrated that power need not be destructive when tempered by wisdom. The hero's journey became a narrative bridge, linking human action with divine influence, courage with reflection, and strength with moral responsibility. It was this careful equilibrium that ensured the story's resonance across centuries. The cultural impact of Perseus' deeds extended beyond myths and artistic depictions. Communities, particularly in the regions surrounding Seriphos and beyond, embraced the moral dimensions of his story. Tales of his courage and prudence were recounted to children, travelers, and students, emphasizing lessons in careful thought, bravery, and ethical action. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were instructive tools, shaping values and inspiring reflection. Perseus' legacy thus became a living, breathing guide to human conduct, illustrating the timeless importance of courage exercised with awareness and responsibility. Even the natural landscapes associated with his journey carried symbolic weight. The cliffs, the seas, and the forests traversed by Perseus became sites of reflection in storytelling and imagination. The cave of Medusa, once terrifying and foreboding, transformed into a metaphorical space where preparation, courage, and intellect intersect. The winds along the coastline, the gentle rise and fall of waves, and the quiet observation of stars overhead all became part of the narrative landscape, reinforcing the hero's lessons in both tangible and symbolic ways. These reflections allowed later generations to connect with the story on multiple levels, appreciating both the thrill of adventure and the calm wisdom underlying heroic action. Perseus' influence also extended to the moral imagination of humanity. The careful consideration of consequences, the integration of divine guidance with personal judgment, and the reflective approach to power demonstrated in his story offered lessons beyond the mythological realm. Leaders, thinkers, and ordinary individuals could draw parallels between their own lives and the hero's journey, understanding that courage alone is insufficient without careful thought, ethical responsibility, and awareness of the broader implications of action. In this sense, Perseus' legacy bridged the gap between myth and human morality, offering guidance that transcended time and geography. Even in the quiet spaces of storytelling, when myths were recounted in low voices by firesides or under the calm night sky, the story of Perseus resonated deeply. Listeners could imagine the hero walking along rocky cliffs, reflecting on the journey, carrying both triumph and responsibility. They could sense the weight of Medusa's head, the quiet courage required to face such danger, and the thoughtful restraint exercised in its use. These subtle details, emphasized in calm narrative, allowed the myth to settle gently into memory, shaping the imagination and values of those who listened. Ultimately, Perseus' story endured because it combined action with reflection, triumph with responsibility, and adventure with ethical consideration. His heroism was not defined merely by defeating Medusa or confronting Polydectes, but by the mindful, deliberate approach he took throughout his journey. This balance ensured that his influence extended far beyond the immediate events, shaping myth, art, moral reflection, and cultural memory. The ripple of his legacy touched countless lives, offering lessons in courage, strategy, empathy, and the careful exercise of power, lessons as relevant in human society as they were in the mythic imagination. In this way, the hero's legacy became timeless. Perseus' actions, his careful handling of danger, and his reflective journey home offered a narrative framework for understanding the interplay between human courage, divine influence, and moral responsibility. Medusa's story, intertwined with his, continued to caution, inspire, and provoke reflection. And through it all, the lessons endured, quietly and persistently, echoing across generations as a testament to the enduring power of myth, the calm strength of reflection, and the profound influence of a hero who moved with both courage and wisdom. As night fell and the world grew quiet, the story of Perseus and Medusa settled gently into thought, like a soft whisper carried by the wind. The hero's journey, filled with danger, courage, and divine guidance, now transformed into a quiet reflection suitable for rest and contemplation. The events of battle, flight, and confrontation faded into gentle imagery. The glimmer of the polished shield, the soft movement of winged sandals, the quiet ripple of waves along Serifo's shores. In this calm, immersive space, the lessons of myth could be absorbed slowly, like the fading light of sunset brushing the horizon. The story invites the mind to consider the delicate balance of heroism. Courage is not merely the ability to act in the face of danger, but the capacity to combine strength with awareness, strategy with patience, and action with reflection. Perseus' journey embodies this principle. Even in the face of Medusa's terrifying gaze, he did not rush recklessly. He observed, planned, and relied upon both divine gifts and personal wisdom. The story encourages the dreaming mind to consider that bravery, in all its forms, is most profound when guided by calm thought and careful intention. Reflecting further, the myth offers insight into the interplay between fate and free will. Perseus was aided by gods, guided by divine instruments, yet it was his own choices, measured, deliberate, and empathetic, that shaped the outcome. The Gorgon's power, formidable as it was, became manageable through careful planning and courageous action. The dreaming mind may linger on this interplay, sensing that life itself is a journey of small decisions guided by forces both seen and unseen, and that the thoughtful exercise of agency is a form of quiet heroism. The presence of Medusa's head serves as a meditation on responsibility. Even when possessing great power, Perseus exercises restraint and respect, ensuring that consequences are managed with care. The tale whispers gently to the mind, suggesting that the weight of authority or capability is best borne with mindfulness. Just as the hero moves through shadowed caves and treacherous cliffs with precision, so too can the dreaming mind explore ideas, challenges, and emotions with careful attention, navigating potential dangers with calm awareness. Danae's presence throughout the journey adds warmth and emotional resonance to the story. The quiet moments of reunion, the gratitude and relief she feels, remind the mind of the importance of connection, love, and human bonds. Even in the midst of adventure, myth recognizes the subtle threads of care, protection, and family. For the sleepy mind, these images provide gentle comfort, reinforcing that heroism is not only about personal triumph, but about nurturing, safeguarding, and acting with empathy toward those we hold dear. The landscapes of the story, from the haunted Gorgon's lair to the rolling hills and glittering seas of Serifo's, serve as a canvas for imagination. In quiet reflection, the mind may wander through these spaces slowly, the soft glimmer of moonlight on waves, the stillness of stone statues frozen in awe or terror, the quiet rustle of leaves along the cliffs. These settings create a gentle rhythm of imagery that soothes the mind, allowing tension to fade while the narrative lingers in a calm, immersive way. The hero's journey becomes a backdrop for gentle contemplation, a space for both awe and serenity. Even the creatures encountered along the way, from Medusa herself to the serpents entwined in her hair, take on a reflective quality. In the safety of story and imagination, they transform from figures of immediate terror to symbols of challenge, caution, and respect for forces greater than oneself. The mind can linger on these forms without fear, absorbing the lessons embedded in their existence. That danger may exist, but thoughtful preparation, courage, and empathy provide a path forward. The myth becomes not only a tale of adventure, but a meditation on awareness and careful action. As the narrative settles, the mind is invited to consider the enduring power of myth. Perseus' story, intertwined with Medusa, Danae, and the forces of gods and fate, carries lessons that are both timeless and gentle. Bravery, strategy, empathy, and reflection intertwine, offering a map for navigating both extraordinary events and ordinary life. Even in sleep, these lessons may resonate quietly, reminding the dreaming mind that courage is not reckless, that power is to be handled with care, and that reflection and empathy are essential companions to action. The calm repetition of key moments, the reflective pause before confronting Medusa, the careful use of divine gifts, the measured return home, creates a soothing rhythm for the listener. Each event, though dramatic in context, is presented as a meditation in motion, emphasizing balance and thoughtful execution. The sleepy mind can drift through these sequences gently, imagining the hero's careful steps, the subtle interplay of shadow and light, the quiet resolution of tension in ways that both fascinate and calm. Finally, the story's conclusion, though filled with triumph and the restoration of justice, emphasizes serenity rather than spectacle. Medusa's head is safely contained, Polydectes' threat is neutralized, Danae is protected, and Perseus moves forward with calm awareness of the lessons learned. In the quiet aftermath, the mind can absorb these images like soft light filtering through trees, gentle, slow, and peaceful. The narrative settles into memory, leaving both hero and listener with a sense of completion, understanding, and serenity. As sleep approaches, the story whispers its final lesson: heroism is measured, power is tempered, courage is guided by wisdom, and myths endure because they teach these truths gently, persistently, and beautifully. The mind, lulled by reflective imagery, rhythmic narration, and calm moral resonance, drifts into rest, carrying with it the quiet strength and serenity of a story told with care, intention, and timeless insight. As the story of Perseus and Medusa draws to its close, the mind is invited to settle into quiet reflection. The hero's journey, though filled with danger, divine intervention, and extraordinary challenges, ultimately leaves a lasting imprint not through spectacle alone, but through the wisdom woven into every decision, every pause, and every act of courage. Perseus' careful navigation of peril, his thoughtful handling of Medusa's head, and his protective devotion to Danae illuminate the delicate balance between power, responsibility, and empathy. The myth lingers gently, offering a meditation on the interplay of human courage and divine guidance. Medusa, once feared and misunderstood, remains immortal in story, not as a mere monster, but as a figure whose tragedy and strength evoke reflection. Her story, intertwined with Perseus' triumph, serves as a reminder that even in moments of great fear, careful thought, patience, and understanding can guide actions toward justice rather than recklessness. For the listener, these reflections encourage a sense of calm contemplation, a recognition that challenges are most wisely met with both courage and mindfulness. In the stillness that follows, the lessons of the myth settle like soft light over the landscape of imagination. Perseus' journey teaches that heroism is measured not only by bravery but by the wisdom to know when and how to act. Power, even when divinely granted, carries responsibility. Every choice has ripple effects, and every victory is most meaningful when guided by thoughtfulness and empathy. These enduring truths, embedded in the quiet rhythms of myth, offer comfort and guidance, inviting the mind to absorb them gently. And so, the tale concludes, not with loud celebration, but with serene understanding. Perseus returns home, Danae is safe, Medusa's legacy endures, and the story itself becomes a gentle companion for reflection, thought, and rest. As the listener drifts into sleep, the calm wisdom of heroism, the enduring presence of myth, and the quiet triumph of careful courage remain, settling softly into memory, leaving a sense of peace and thoughtful wonder that lingers long after the story ends.